We are graphic.
You are graphic. All righty.
Does that come through?
I think I see it. Yeah.
No, I meant the sound of me.
Yes, the sound comes through. Yes.
The tooth tapping. Tooth tapping sound.
It's that pesky atmosphere that conducts all those sounds to us, along with the internet. Live from the Plutopia verse, this is the Plutopia News Network Happy Hour. Our guest tonight is Kevin Welch, president of EFF Austin and an all-around smart guy. I'm Scoop Sweeney, the only human to ever fail the Turing test and be rejected by technology. And our resident smart guy, John Lebkowski. That's him over there.
Ooh, you keep calling this a happy hour, but all we do once we're here is complain.
Well, I'm always happy to complain. I'm a complainer by nature.
Oh, there you go. So that's what we're happy about. We're happy to be complaining.
Just remember, it's always easy to criticize people instead of propose your own ideas.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a good idea.
I know.
I just have to think of somebody to criticize. Let's see. I wonder if I should start a list.
Making a list and checking it twice.
Might need to start a novel there.
Might need a huge database to hold all those names. There's plenty of wrongdoers out there.
So is it correct to say that we are on the internet right now?
I mean, it depends on whether you define the internet as just the World Wide Web or not. But as our board member, Chris Boyd, would emphatically say, the internet and World Wide Web are not the same thing. So technically, since this is going on over TCP IP in some fashion, yes, we are on the internet.
Or well, one way to say on us.
One way to say that is it all depends on where you are in the stack, right?
Yeah. And actually, I find myself going, I actually don't. I'm trying to think now, like RTC, which is probably what this is running. I'm trying to remember what its stack is.
While we are talking here about the internet, I just realized that I have an old presentation that I should scare up here. You may have seen it before. It's my old Future of the Internet thing. I wonder if I can find it.
I think you, at some point, maybe even gave that to EFF Austin.
I believe I did. I gave it, I did this presentation in a number of places, and I haven't gone back in a while to see how stupid it really was.
How accurate or not it was.
Yeah, and there's more than one version of it. There's actually one called The History of the Future of the Internet, which, I could also do. But what I'm going to try to do here is see if I can actually open this thing, because I think that it wouldn't be a bad way for us to get started thinking about protecting the internet. Because one question is, what the hell is the internet anymore? And I think I got to some of that. I did this thing one time for a bunch of IEEE. Let's see, I don't know whether it was an engineering group or a project management group, but what happened was that there was a history piece and then a future piece. And I had trouble getting to the future piece because they were having such a good time waxing nostalgic about the history of the internet.
Right. We all were so optimistic. We all thought that the problem was just that true information was being kept from people. And if we gave everybody the facts, then society would get better magically.
Is that going to happen?
Well, I was going to wear my 90s nostalgia T-shirt instead of the Plutopia T-shirt tonight, because the 90s is when I really enjoyed the internet, and it didn't scare me at all. I mean, I may have scared it, but it's kind of reversed since then, and it is kind of scaring me now.
Yeah, at the time, it was always like the internet was this incredible place where you were always discovering something new and amazing people were doing on it. And now it's just, the old joke, we're all on 5 sites sharing screenshots of the other 4 and waiting to find what terrible policy change one of the 5 sites will hand down next.
Okay, so I am going to attempt this, but it may botch in the same way that it was botching before.
Well, if you give us the history of the internet, did you give Al Gore the proper credit, John?
Uh, I didn't because actually I probably did. I'm not sure that I talked about that particular aspect of it.
Our pal Al.
Okay, here we go.
Well, he definitely needs credit for his series of tubes he put together.
Let's find out if this really works, though. Okay. Are you seeing it?
The future of the internet. There it is.
I can't promise the internet is seeing it, but I'm seeing it.
So when I did this thing, I was looking at internet maps. There's one thing. There were a lot of maps sort of drifting here and there. I think that this one is one that I got from Kevin Kelly, who used to be the editor of Wired magazine. I think a lot of people know who Kevin Kelly is.
He's pretty famous in this space.
Yeah, and this is kind of, I mean, you can kind of figure out about when this would have been made. It would have been made like toward the end of the 90s or around 2000. You can still see AOL down there, but it's tiny. Look how small Amazon is down there at the bottom.
The fact I see Twitter on it means it's at least 2007, 2008.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Well, I see
it's later than I thought.
I really miss the Pirate Bay. Is that even still around?
Oh, it still exists. The crazy Scandinavian anarchist who made the Pirate Bay. One of my favorite things ever was when there was like some controversy around one of those right-wing controversial sites getting kicked off the internet. You know, people were like, well, surely as a radical free speech activist, he's troubled by this. And his reaction was basically, no, one, I like seeing fascists kicked off the internet. And two, they are just bad at not getting kicked off the internet. I literally hid the Pirate Bay servers in a decommissioned sub at the bottom of the ocean so they couldn't kick me off the internet.
So we should mention that Pirate Bay was a place where illegally copied files were stored, usually as BitTorrents. And people would download these torrent files.
Where I have to do the disclaimer of like, BitTorrent is just a tool. The fact that people predominantly used it for illegal things does not mean BitTorrent itself is an invalid technology.
Well, and the reason that they used BitTorrent was because it was easier to evade blocking or capturing of some sort.
No, there were practical reasons it became the preferred choice, though it legitimately to this day is the best, most efficient tech for peer-to-peer sharing files. And files can be shared legally. So it's still the best tool if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, and don't kill the messenger.
The BitTorrent crew always emphasized that they were focused on legal uses of BitTorrent, but it was certainly used for pirating.
It's certainly non-technical, average people who just wanted to watch a movie or play a game without paying for it, which I will neither confirm or deny I might have made heavy use of. Yes, that is primarily what it was used for.
Well, or to be able to see something that it was hard to see otherwise, or maybe see it before it was released, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, legitimately, sometimes it was like, this is a weird art film from Europe from the 1940s I want to watch, and there's nowhere to get it legally. You know,
and the reason that we don't hear about that as much now, because what's happened since then is that pretty much all content has become streamable online, either by signing up to various platforms, or you can maybe purchase a one-off screening. You know, you can like rent it or buy it online. That has become really easy to do, and it's so easy to do now that people just do that.
Well, and the truth is, even a lot of the illegal watching of things has moved to streaming. There's a lot of sketchy sites where if you don't click on a pop-up that will give you a virus, you can stream a movie and watch it without paying. So a lot of people who don't want to have to manage their hard drive being cluttered with files, that is, even if they're going to not pay and break the law, they have also moved to streaming. And
interesting. I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, and there's a practical reason as well that courts have basically ruled that only people who provide illegal streams are liable, because technically a stream does not involve you copying the file, unlike it does with BitTorrent. Watching an illegal stream, you basically don't face any legal liability. Only the provider of the stream does. So it's safer if you don't want to get nailed, basically.
Did you see the thing that Wired, I think it was in my feed today from Wired, about the budget and mystery streaming boxes from China that have come out, and they all had malware baked into it in the firmware that called the mothership back in China and got involved with all sorts of nefarious behavior.
I mean, it's a long practice and not unique to China. There was some article I read several years ago that said that some very prominent security, I forget to say what they did, but it was a big company for private secure communications that it was Swiss and it existed since the 1940s or 50s. Turned out the whole thing was a front for the CIA, and anything they'd provided, they'd backdoored everyone, basically.
Amazing.
I want to call your attention to the latest slide that I have offered, and how it makes a reference to something called e-democracy. This was back when people thought democracy was something that could survive, and not only could survive, but would be enhanced and helped along by the internet.
Yeah, it's based on you believing the sweet but clearly naive idea that most people want or believe in democracy, as opposed to their team forcing everyone else to do what they want if they can get away with it.
And the interesting thing here, this is a very idealistic piece, really. The idea of the noosphere, which goes back, I can't remember. Oh, this is terrible. I don't remember the name of the person who coined that.
Desjardins.
No, it was before Desjardins, though. He actually.
Oh, really? I thought
another guy
came up with the nose.
But Teilhard is the guy who took the ball and ran with it for sure.
Okay, and didn't invent it.
Man, yeah, he talked about the noosphere, and what he envisioned. The internet sounded a lot like what he envisioned, which was, everybody connected globally. A collection of global minds, a global mind.
You were probably thinking of the other main guy who popularized it, was Vladimir Vernadsky.
That's it, Vernadsky. But
although apparently Desjardins apparently did coin the term. The earliest reference to it is in Desjardins' 1922 Cosmogenesis.
Oh, okay. So the noosphere, where is it? It doesn't seem to be here. It was supposed to be coming. What do you think?
Well, so I mean, I don't think it's fundamental idea that you can have structures of consciousness at different organizational levels is wrong. Just anybody who studied the psychology of crowds knows there's validity in the idea of a noosphere. I think I would just say the idea that a planetary hive mind facilitated by the internet, there was maybe some naivety that this would purely result in utopian dreams, when clearly there are some nightmares and bad trips going on as well.
Yeah, and one significant thing here is that this shows a vision for the internet, and there were other visions for the internet. We saw that earlier map too. There was other ways of seeing the internet. There's various platforms that sit on the internet, and when we talk about protecting the internet, the relevant question, as far as I'm concerned, is what exactly are we protecting? What do we really want the internet to be? What should the internet be? And how well can we protect it from becoming something else?
Right. You're absolutely right that I think if you ask different people about the canonical, ideal, perfect internet, free from threats from them, you'd get different answers from different people.
I wonder what's on here. So at the time that I created this thing, we were just starting to have higher speed, like broadband was rolling out. More people were starting to be online. That thing about everything is miscellaneous, that was from David Weinberger. And basically what he was talking about is the fact that rather than organizing information, you make information searchable. You find ways to surf information and find the information you need, and also much of the time finding information that you didn't know you needed.
Well, I would
And
certainly say that we have continued to move in the directions he was envisioning, to the point that, you know, a lot of people have even observed that, you know, we get this idea that, well, you know, younger generations are inherently more technologically savvy, and some sociologists have noticed that actually Gen X and millennials around certain computer tasks actually seem more knowledgeable than Gen Z, specifically the idea of navigating file directories, which is the older way of actually having to organize information, whereas a lot of modern computers and social media platforms are all built around you just search for what you want, and behind the scenes it magically finds it for you and handles all the details of where it's saved and stored, basically.
And one potential downside of that is that the algorithm could be structured to feed you what someone else wants you to see, not necessarily what you're looking for.
And this is a perfect well, this is a
links.
perfect segue to drop one of the big bombshells that actually came out, though possibly this is based on insider information from the trial and from a quickly seen internal slide. So if it turns out new details emerge, well, then I may change this. But one of the big bombshells that came out of the big Google versus Microsoft antitrust trial going on right now is that apparently, we don't know for how long they've been doing this, but apparently behind the scenes, Google search is essentially doing exactly that, where you aren't actually searching for what you think you're searching for. They will kind of silently replace your search with a search that is similar, but will make them more money.
Absolutely. That's why they're in business. They don't care about you learning what you wanted to learn. They want you to learn the name of their advertising partners.
Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's, as I said, based on a briefly glimpsed internal slide in the trial from the former general counsel of DuckDuckGo. So potentially a biased party reporting this.
I would say.
But
well,
also not in any way really that surprising that Google would, you know, their business is ads, and this is how they make money. Not really.
Well,
that
it surprises me
the
because
temptation.
they said they would do no evil.
Yeah, right.
I've
this
generally
kind of
found
falls
people
into
who
the
aren't
whole
evil
dead
don't
internet
feel the
theory.
need to straight up say they won't do that, though.
Oh my
We
God.
all should have probably, in retrospect, been a little suspicious that they felt compelled to tell us that.
Well, you know,
I have to say, I kind of don't believe that it was exactly that, but I'm not sure exactly what it was. I think so. The problem is that so Google has over the years worked very, very hard to provide authoritative search results of high quality. And that's what they're known for. That's the product, right? As far as search is concerned, anyway. And they've been at war for years with people who are trying to game the system, and in gaming the system to try to move other items up in search. You know, the whole thing where the SEO guy says, I'll put you at the top of search. Well, if he does that, he's actually diminishing the search results, because if you were a quality link, you would probably be at the top of search anyway. And if he's done some kind of fancy footwork to put you at the top of search, it has had an impact on the quality of search. So they have shut that down over and over again.
And those
so
are,
now we're talking about
legitimate modifications. Like, yes, I agree, those are.
But what you're talking about would have the same effect of diminishing the quality of the search, wouldn't it?
Well, I'm not the first person to observe. There's actually been people complaining for several years now that, and, you know, admittedly, my memories are fuzzy, but it does kind of match my own impressions, that Google search is noticeably worse than it used to be, say, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, but they're just saying it's harder to find porn.
I don't know. I'm just saying that people complain complaint is that it's very hard to find stuff that is not clearly like fake stuff trying to convince you to buy products. That like if you want any real feedback on a product from real human beings, the joke is that you basically have to ask Reddit, that Google won't give you a legitimate answer.
Well, but part of that is that Google can only work with what's there in the infosphere, right? So if you're actually trying to get relevant assessments of product quality, that's been gamed so much, not just not within Google, but across the internet. Like
SEO
Amazon's a good example.
optimization is a whole field, and yes, there are people constantly trying to game and hack this system. Though
I'm also thinking about like fake reviews and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, no, but I mean, one interesting thing I saw pointed out is, about another reason why Google, that this might not even be entirely their fault, why it's maybe gotten not as good, as the whole thing is built on the PageRank algorithm. As the internet has become increasingly centralized, fewer websites, PageRank inherently breaks down under such a scenario.
Yeah, one thing that is contributing to the centralization is the fact that the model that preceded the internet was broadcast, and there's still been a tendency to kind of want to go there. And I've actually got that on here where I mentioned that various kinds of broadcasting, streaming, we talk about streaming now. So the streaming services are sort of taking the place of the television model that we had before. First, we had broadcast over the air television, which was just a few channels. And then we had cable, which gave us a whole lot of channels. But now
there were originally no ads on cable, and then they added ads later.
And now you have streaming, and that's kind of what's happening with streaming too. But it is fairly centralized, even though it's more distributed than television was, and it's more on demand than television was. And it's more satisfying to the user in that they can find what they want to see. And it's like, I mean, I can remember for most of my life, if you didn't see that episode of the show that screened last night, you didn't have much hope of seeing it unless it popped up in summer reruns, which it might or might not.
Well,
it was just gone,
Well, that gets into a weird reemergence of media vanishing, coming back, where like streaming services have actually increasingly been playing tax games of yanking their own series off their own platforms so they can claim they're worth less because they have less content, so their tax bill will be lower.
Well, don't you think it's going to end up with the streaming services following the same path that the networks did? Instead of a bunch of services, they're going to eventually conglomerate into maybe two or three big streaming services, because they're all losing money by the bucketful, and they're all raising. If you notice, they're all raising their rates right now. And that's because they're losing.
I'm calling it's not long before it is basically cable on the internet. It's going to not be long until somebody starts proposing, and these already actually exist to a certain extent, but essentially bundling multiple streaming services. And then the final step is the ability to buy them individually. You can only buy them in a bundle.
Well, I have bundled services. I mean, I have a bundle that includes Hulu and Disney Plus and ESPN, but there's really just all the Disney streaming services,
I'm
right?
I call it now that within 5 years, just like how they've all introduced ad tiers now, I call it in 5 years they're going to start disabling non-bundled access to their streaming. I could be wrong, but that's my prediction.
I don't know.
There being any effort to penalize people who are still on cable. If you're still on cable, you can't get onto our streaming service.
Well, I mean, basically, from what I understand, it's live sports is the main thing keeping cable alive at this point.
Well, live sports is now on Prime Video.
Well, and I was going to mention, I mean, Prime is a good example of where I think things are going, because Prime gets content from many sources, including bringing in sources that are also available standalone. let's say like AMC, for instance. You can subscribe standalone to AMC content, but you can also subscribe to AMC and Stars and various other things through Amazon. And you can also do it through Apple when you're using Apple TV. There's various ways to bring a bunch of platforms together, kind of depending on how much you want to spend and which platforms you really want to have, what you think is important to you. I don't necessarily think that they'll force people to use bundles of services, but I think that there is going to be an inherent trend for services to be bundled more and more.
I mean, the initial pitch, of course, will be convenience. You're already subscribed to all of them anyway. But yeah, I mean, I could be wrong, but it's just the cynic in me, because I remember how awesome streaming was at the beginning. I was an early adopter of Netflix streaming, and I thought it was incredible. And I've just watched it get worse and worse and worse over the last 10 years.
Well, and I've seen several articles recently where they talk about the end of the golden age of streaming and how that's kind of done now. And kind of the problem is that it was sort of like in the early internet, they were spending money right and left to build all these sites without thinking too much about how to get an acceptable return on their investment. And they kind of did that with streaming too. And people are stepping in who say, well, we really need to be able to make money with this. So we can't like afford to produce shows of this quality.
Right.
Except maybe as exceptions to the rule. They can't really.
Right. The end of the initial golden age of the internet, yes, essentially happened when a lot of people said, you can't just give people all these awesome sites for free. It has to make money somehow. And that's how the surveillance advertising industry took off.
Yeah, I think the whole problem with the finances behind all of these streaming services, it's going to be subjected to the same thing that's happened to a lot of other major businesses, industries in this country, is, venture capital will get in there, get a hold on it, and start really driving the boat, basically, and say, take this money. And when you're overburdened, then eventually you either have to find some way out of that relationship, or you're going to just be, smothered by your debt.
Yeah. I'd be remiss if I did not say everything we're talking about dancing around is basically various examples of Cory Doctorow's portmanteau of enshittification of the internet.
Yep. Another thing on this slide that I've got up now is this thing about politics. That seems quaint, doesn't it? The idea, I mean,
the internet's going to fix democracy. That's nice.
We could see a lot of adhocracies, like ad hoc movements starting to emerge. And it looked like, kind of the idea at the time was that those things would start making alignments and that we would have a more democratic system, in that there would be so many different ways for people to engage politically and come in through these adhocracies versus joining like one big party. And then there was the Tea Party at the time, which, I wouldn't have predicted would actually have succeeded to completely subvert democracy, but look what's happening.
Well, the Tea Party, frankly, compared to what that movement eventually morphed into, seems very quaint in retrospect.
Yeah, looks back on it's really nice to look back on the good old days of the Tea Party. They weren't nearly as bizarre as what we're stuck with now.
They were rooted in a coherent political ideology, even if it was one I didn't agree with. At least there was some worldview.
So this next slide, actually not the next slide, there was one with some stats on it that are pretty outdated, but network effect is one of the important parts. It's important to any platform on the internet. The more people adopt a platform, the more people need to adopt a platform, right?
I like the part about everybody gets your email, and it's Yeah, they do, whether you want them to or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vast majority of email goes unread because it's mostly a bunch of BS you don't want to read, even if you had time to read all of it.
And the stuff that's really important, someone may be reading it that you're not aware of until it's too late.
Yeah, it's true. But the network effect aspect of that is that email became more valuable as more people had email. It didn't really mean that much to have email if there were only 3 guys that you could send an email to. But when everybody has email, email is much more usable and valuable.
Yeah, and this gets into a lot of the issues of the sort of problems with Web 2.0 social media and some of the approaches that Web 3.0, as they call, is trying to fix with social media. That social media is valuable precisely because of its network effects, but because each social media site is not interoperable with any of the others, they basically become walled gardens with very high switching costs if you want to leave because you can't talk to anyone on the thing. And if everybody is on the one that has all the people because it's useful because of the network effect, you're stuck with a few sites abusing their users. And that's what all the Fediverse stuff is about, trying to make social media like email so that you can switch from one to another painlessly. It's, it's getting there. The tech is still a bit creaky and frankly may need another few years of like nerds nerding harder before people who aren't like terminally online like me care, but it is interesting to see the developments.
The other thing here I was talking about as a downside of the internet, an unmanageable deluge of useful information, not useless, but useful.
Right. Even if it's all useful, you're still faced with decision fatigue of, well, right. I can't read all of it. What's the best use of my time?
Can't see the forest with the trees, and there's lots of trees out there.
I think I saw some meme making the rounds that was basically like, please bear with me. My brain is being overwhelmed by a 24/7 onslaught of infinite information when it evolved to keep warm around a fire in a cave.
So people are now starting to sort this out a bit, though. The next thing I mentioned was the even worse unmanageable deluge of useless information, the spam and the noise. But I think many people, I have things organized. I have organized my information space, and I'm not being overwhelmed by information to the extent that I could be.
Yeah,
though it can be pretty overwhelming still.
I've more aggressively, it used to be when I was younger that I'd have like FOMO and like, oh, I need to get all the information. I have started more aggressively cutting out subscribing to information that is not generating me enough value to be worth it.
But it's difficult enough and complex enough to do this sorting out of things that I find myself wondering about people who really sort of don't grasp the technologies as well and maybe haven't had as much experience. I mean, like, we've been involved in developing these kinds of technologies. We really understand how they work, right? So for us, it's much easier.
I still don't know how it all works, and that's my career, like it's very complicated even for people who work with it.
True. Yeah.
And, and I guess and I think, that actually gets right there too. Everybody loves to rag on the algorithm, and admittedly, yes, there are so many negative downsides and harms with a lot of these algorithmically curated feeds, but people always in that discussion, it's like, well, if it's so bad, why do they persist? And the real answer is because exactly what you said, this onslaught of information. A lot of people are just like, just take all the work of managing it away from me. Just feed me what I care about, and I don't want to have to micromanage it. It's the same reason as I might dunk on like a Gen Zer who doesn't know how a file system works, but they're sort of like, I don't want to organize directory structures. I just want to type what I want and get it.
Well, I can remember being a little bit upset that Facebook insisted on showing me a curated feed, but they did have an option to see a feed that was chronological and not
I think they
curated.
Still do. They just kind of hide it. Of
But
course, I used to get very angry about that too, but I did, and I still am. Like, I still have opinions on algorithms and how to fix some of the problems with them. But I remember one time it did occur to me, okay, I can actually think of a legitimate reason you would not want a chronological feed, which is, well, what if you're subscribed to some things that just like post like 100 times an hour? Suddenly your feed is nothing but that.
well, the other
Basically,
thing,
a algorithmic feed can go, they probably don't want to see every post from this posting constantly.
well, what I was getting at there was that once I found how to turn on the chronological feed and did it, I understood why they were not showing me the chronological feed and why they were making a real effort to make it hard for me to sustain the chronological feed because it is not as exciting. I
They've
mean,
done a lot of research about that. Yes,
the
you
curation
claim
really works. They
intellectually,
show you stuff you really want to see.
you claim intellectually that you want the chronological feed, but they've got all the research to prove, well, you say that, but you're way more engaged when we curate the feed for you.
Right, right. And of course, that gets to this bottom statement here: money changes everything. And one thing that money affects is how they want you to experience their platform.
Yeah,
They want you to experience your
money.
Yeah, in the way that makes them money. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what was this? Oh, this was I was thinking about different ways of organizing the network, and originally people sort of thought of the internet as being free and open, a network of networks. There was this end-to-end principle, which meant that you didn't screw with the transmission internally. That what happened in transit was fairly neutral.
Yes, it was
a dumb network.
It was inspired by the phone network. The idea, it's a common carrier, and the network itself should not have opinions about what content is worthy or worthwhile. An individual website can have opinions about curation and content moderation, but the medium itself, the network, should be neutral. That net neutrality, essentially.
Right. Yeah, and but like old internet guys like me wanted that kind of internet and have advocated for it and fought for it. One of the things that we were concerned about or feared was that we would have something more like cable television, where selections would be limited. There'd be a high quality of service and a high barrier to entry for content.
What cable television ever gave you that? I've had just the opposite.
And the truth is that a lot of people, I learned all this when I did a lot of research, and a lot of people actually view Tim Wu's net neutrality as a band-aid on the more utopian idea of open access. Because the real truth is that because competing ISPs, they're not actually required to share their wires with you. It's actually incredibly expensive to start your own ISP and compete with them, to the point that even Google with Google Fiber can't really roll out nationally the way their competitors are.
Yeah, and this thing about high quality of service here, really just talking about the fact that the big operators can deliver you a high quality of service. What that really does is it kind of sidelines smaller operators. This was the idea that you would have, if you had information superhighways, so to speak, that you would also have access roads going off into roads that were not toll roads, but they were really slow and not well kept, and
the concern was that this would get hyper, politicized, people deliberately slowing websites they ideologically disagree with, etc.
Yeah. And then the other way to look at it was what I referred to as a balkanized hybrid, where you have walled gardens and paywalls plus these lower value other things, which is kind of closer to what I just described. So people will pay a lot of money for a high quality of service. Like I pay a lot of money for my internet service, and then I pay a lot of money to various content providers that
Right.
send me streaming content. When I look at the bill that I pay ultimately just to get content and entertain myself, it's a little scary. It's a big hunk of money.
Well, one thing that I think was, the big overlooked factor in some of those like early utopian visions of the internet, and frankly, it's the same flaw. A lot of the early internet culture is really wrapped up in early like Burning Man burner culture as well. There's a lot of overlap, and there's sort of both early burner culture and also early internet culture, early cyber culture, had these like very like, post-capitalist anarchist sort of ideals of just that like we'd live in this world where everything is free and everyone shares and participates collectively. And as I've always said, like it's a beautiful vision, but okay, you've created this utopian bubble. It only works because there's still an capitalist system outside of it propping the whole thing up. How do you think all that stuff gets to Burning Man? I mean, it's a
and it leaks in. I mean, Burning Man is now filled with people who have a lot of money.
Exactly.
And it's really crowded. It's huge.
Yeah. And some of the problem with the internet is, okay, the software, yes, is post scarcity, where write it once and it works forever, is free forever. You can share, reproduce, and copy it forever. That part works. The problem is there's still physical hardware running all of it, and real human beings have to make and manufacture that stuff and mine the raw materials for it and ship it around the world and pay the electricity bills on massive server farms. The internet is not free to make all this happen, even though we all want to pretend it is and browse around it for free,
These things, this is really
yeah, you did this around 2010. I mean, social network had really come out. That. Yeah.
So
this is back when Mark was still a boy wunderkind.
Well, we were using Mark Zuckerberg as an example of the power of the internet. That he could just in his college dorm he could create this huge company.
Right.
We were trying to make it capitalist friendly, I guess, by making that kind of argument.
Well, you usually in America have to make it capitalist friendly if you want to get people on board.
And then I have something about applications. Actually, though, kind of going back to that earlier slide. So what I think that when we talk about protecting the internet, we're often talking about trying to protect the internet in that first bullet, And when we talk about supporting the Fediverse and doing IndieWeb, I think we're talking about that first bullet.
Right. So, well, what we're kind of talking about doing is, as I said, this is a distinction that is made a lot in internet activist circles, that, net neutrality as an idea is specifically about the network itself, the physical cables, the physical packets, the ISPs, etc. But then when you're talking about an individual website, well, that is some just essentially private citizen or private company or entity who in theory has a lot of free speech rights around how they conduct content on their website. Very similar to, you wouldn't think it at all strange that, if you have guests over at your house, your rules. You can kick people out for any reason, including they said something that pissed you off, So websites are similar. The problem, so it's not an issue that websites engage in content moderation and curation and set policies about what speech they do and don't want on their website. It does become problematic when there's basically 5 social media websites that are monopolies. And if they don't like you saying what you're saying, you can't go somewhere else. And the remedy, that we hope is bringing like a free internet to social media via making an interoperable protocol, much like email, so that you can freely move around and find one that fits your beliefs about speech. Because you can't necessarily remedy this with like a government mandate like Texas and Florida have been trying to do of you may not ban people from this social media site for these opinions, because that's still the government making rules about private actors' speech and what
Yeah.
they may and may not say. It's still a First Amendment violation. That's why Fediverse proponents are like, okay, we clearly have a problem here. We can't just force these websites to let everybody say whatever they want, because that opens a whole different can of worms. We're trying to come up with like a technical solution to bring that network to social media, just like it exists lower down on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, the real challenge is connecting with your friends, right? It's easy to
Right.
connect with your friends on Facebook, and maybe you can find new people to connect with and have your sort of slice of community represented there. And if you want to have that without having to do it through a centralized system like Facebook, then there has to be some thought to what the architecture would be to support that.
Right,
And
and
that's
that's what
kind of
the
what
activity
IndieWeb is
pubs,
about.
right? That's what the
Yeah, an
activity
activity
pub
pub.
protocol is about. And to be clear, activity pub is a protocol. It's I've not dug deeply into the technicals, but it's basically about a standardized way of representing social media accounts. You are an entity, you have friends or followers, and that this is a standardized data format, just like JSON or something, that you can export and import into different social media providers, similar to like exporting, like an ICS file for your mail calendar or something. Very similar idea.
Yeah, I mean, the data about people and connections are not proprietary within
Right.
a platform like Facebook,
A social
but
network
they're
graph
distributed.
is a
Yeah,
data structure independent of any renderer or implementer of the data structure.
right.
Exactly. And so, yeah, the real idea is that, that you could represent your social relationships in a portable way, and you choose where you want to realize that.
It's like the social graph as a public utility.
Yeah, in a way.
I'm writing that down. I'm going to put that on a sign and march down the highway with it.
There we
Sounds like a
go.
T-shirt to me.
I don't really know how I don't know how we protect the internet or how we save the internet or how we determine a new structure for the internet other than by supporting people who are doing things like Activity Pub.
And
No,
not
I-
And I've
supporting
tried to
people
do
who are
that.
doing evil things like that Musk guy who shall remain unmentioned. Yeah, he's all for free speech as long as it's his speech.
Yeah, I'm. That was clearly a smokescreen. The guy will ban anyone who hurts his little feelings.
Oh, and he's just a big open raw nerve apparently, because he seems to get offended by just about anything.
Yeah.
If you don't like his favorite
I
candy
I
bar,
I actually, I mean, what's funny is like I tend to give him more benefit of the doubt than some people, and I'm still just like, well, now you're involved in an industry I know a lot about. Good luck, buddy. It's going real well for you.
Well, I don't. I'm not sorry that Elon Musk has acquired Twitter and turned it into basically a kind of a shit show, because I think that has been a net positive in that it has forced people to look for alternatives.
I mean, certainly it has doubled Mastodon's usage, which is not a bad thing.
I just opened Twitter. I'm looking at it right now, and it really doesn't look that different from the way it looked before. It's not really Twitter; it's X.
Yeah, well,
I have to
and
remember to
the
call
truth
it
is,
that.
I mean, the thing that just I'm like, I hope it wasn't just him rambling, is the proposal that he might like start like forcing people, if they want to post, they got to pay him money. And I'm like, I'm not paying for a microblogging site when there's tons of free alternatives.
Yeah, he didn't have much money. Much luck with his charging for the verified account status and all that good stuff.
Well, and he fundamentally didn't understand the point of verification. He thought it was some sort of elite club instead of letting people be confident that they're talking with this real famous person.
Yeah. Well, it could be that he didn't understand it, or it could be that he was just so desperate to figure out a way to make money that he subverted it.
I
Well, when
mean,
someone
who knows, it's hard to say, but I will say that the fact that a story came out that he and his brother literally went to one of the Twitter server farms and just like literally unplugged server racks and like moved them out on like barrel. I mean, I'm just like, no, that's not how a server migration works.
not even close. But yeah, I'm just waiting for someone to do a good clone of his identity on X and, become the new Elon
They've
Musk.
there have been trolls who've pretended to be him. He prioritizes banning them,
I mean, yeah, I wonder why.
But yeah, I mean, we're at an interesting time in the internet. It feels like a lot of the established big players like are kind of breaking down as they lose their original mission statement. And, it's just hard to know what's going to happen. There's a bunch of potentially promising new things on the horizon. Hard to say what. I will say, actually, that the thing that, maybe not to end on a downer note, but I will say one of the things that worries me about Fediverse efforts is that one thing that the centralized platforms have going for them is they have teams of lawyers to handle issues like liability and stuff. And the truth is that anybody who starts like, say, a Mastodon server potentially is responsible for the illegal conduct of their users. There's already been at least one reported instance of a Mastodon server admin getting their place raided because of the actions of one of their users on the server. So that's kind of, to me, the big unknown legal liability that might put a break on the whole thing.
Yeah, the whole legal liability issue, you know, impacts a lot of businesses. Plutopia, we're an LLC simply because John and I actually have things, and if someone says something that's going to get us sued, we can at least keep our homes and our cars.
Right. And I mean,
there's a lot of people, that's their whole business, is looking for people to sue because of whatever they said.
Right. And
if they can find the money, they can have it.
And if some of these very like censorious laws around the internet that lawmakers keep proposing actually become law, then yeah, I worry like, well, if that's going to affect the Fediverse too, well, then that may not be a remedy in and of itself if we can't stop these laws from passing. The big one going around is yet another moral panic about kids, COSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, that's like creates for platforms a duty of care around minor users, but the duty of care is so broad of just you must not do anything that harms them. When nobody agrees about what is or isn't harmful to children, it's basically just going to be a ban hammer for anybody to try to sue and ban anything on social media they don't like.
I guess you would like maybe argue that it's harmful to deprive children of pornography. That's what I would argue if I was YouPorn or something like that.
Well, I mean, to give less facetious.
It's a joke, by the way.
I know it's a joke. I mean, look, to give less facetious examples, like for instance, like for instance, let me give a good example. I don't want to speak glibly. What was one?
Oh, you can be glib. Okay.
Glib is our middle name.
So like for instance, any of these modern hot button topics around teaching children, things like, critical race theory or transgender healthcare, that like people can like very bad arguments. Like they can claim that, oh, well, critical race theory is damaging to children's mental health because it might make them feel bad. So platforms have a duty to care to ban such content, or, doing correlation is not causation with that, like trans teenagers are more at risk of like self-harm, and claiming that, well, clearly seeking out trans content is what caused it. Like there's all sorts of ways to twist data to push an agenda.
Right. It just seems that children are being made into some sort of a cult almost. When John and I were growing up, our playgrounds were rock, and we played on things called monkey bars, which caused many of us to visit the emergency room quite early at an early age. And I never had a bicycle helmet.
But
all of a sudden, it's going the other direction. Like, let's protect the hell out of them, and they won't have any kind of Good
I sometimes wonder
experiences.
if any of these lawmakers, and I mean, the answer is, of course, they're cynically using children as a prop to pursue their
Mhm.
political agendas. But frankly, I just go like, do any of them actually remember being a child? Because I remember myself as a child, and they're really giving children too little credit. Like, children
It's
can handle
true.
a lot, and they want to learn and seek out a lot. Hell, I was playing like, M-rated video games since I was 10 or 11 years old. I didn't turn into a mass shooter.
My
I
parents
had
gave
a
me a Gilbert.
subscription to Playboy.
Yeah, my parents gave me a Gilbert chemistry set and allowed me to make gunpowder. I mean, I had the stuff and it
Oh
told
my
me
God.
how, and I did it, and
Hey,
Well,
I survived.
and I guess just, the final point I would make is that basically they frame it always in terms of parental rights, but nobody ever talks about, well, what if I'm a parent who wants my child to experience this stuff without having to provide official ID or jump through ridiculous hoops? What about my parental
well,
rights?
that was always the free speech problem with, like, when they tried to pass the Communications Decency Act, and when the Supreme Court struck it down, it's like, who decides what is decent?
Right. And who decides what is harmful for children? That's the
Yeah, or
fundamental
harmful
problem with
for
COSA.
people to see in general too. I I gotta say, so we're getting close to the end here, and I really wanted to mention this slide.
Yes, yes.
I told you earlier that I had um, a presentation called "The History of the Future of the Internet," and that's what this slide is from. And sometime we'll have to go over this presentation too, because there's some interesting slides in here. But this one, I think, is a key point, which is, as Tim Wu said, the shape of the future is hard to know, even for the best informed. And this other guy, Lee Raymond, said, the past may be linear, but I believe the future is not. It is a vast array. It's hard to know what's going to happen, and it's hard to know what the true roadmap is for the internet, because there are many potential branches and maybe bridge collapses.
And to complicate the picture even further, I can throw in that immortal William Faulkner quote of, the past is never dead. It's not even past.
That is a good one. Well, what shall we say is, to wrap things up? We're down to our last 3 minutes. We can make an egg in 3 minutes.
I mean, how do we save the internet? I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to people have to feel like they have a collective stake in the internet and in their communities and in their expression, because, people have observed that, even when you have federated technologies like email or emerging federated social media, you still see centralization even in federation. Most people use Gmail. Most people are on the biggest Mastodon server, because it's just, the simple fact is, we all claim we want the power of choice over everything we do, but at the end of the day, there's little time and infinite information, and many people just want it all to work. And so, how do we say the internet? I think you have to get people to feel enough stake in it that they're willing to do more than the bare minimum, that they are participating in the internet. It's not just being fed to them.
Do we have a generation of people who are more knowledgeable? Thinking about, like Doug Rushkoff once said, program or be programmed. Do you think that the generations that are emerging now know better how to program?
I think just the proliferation of people sharing memes, I think a lot of people have a much more fundamental understanding of how much of society is competing mental programmers.
Right on. Okay, well, I guess we're really at the end. It's like
we're at the end of the internet once again.
You reached the end of the internet.
So thanks, Kevin, for joining us again.
It's
pleasure
fun.
As always.
And we'll do it again soon. Yeah, absolutely. All right, gentlemen, I will.
Let's go back on the internet now. Wait,
yeah,
we're still on it.
Fine, we can get off the internet and go back to the internet. Sounds good.
Okay. I'm going to go share some memes.
I've been ruined by the internet, but I've also been vastly helped. So
there you go.
It balances out.
I probably owe my life and career to the internet. So how much can I hate it despite all its problems?
Right on.
Yeah, what would I deal with all that spare time?
Oh God, you'd have to be aware of your own existence and mortality, and nobody's got time for that.
Oh no.
Scoop, by the way, has 2 internet radio stations.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, I'm looking at both of them on my other screen. I have way too many screens. I have to scale back on my screenage.
Well, you can film one of your screens with another device and project it on another screen. That's how you do that. That's pro
Oh, yeah.
tips.
That's frightening.
Yep, yep, yep.
Okay.
Well,